1970. A special act is passed on February 23rd. It brings into being a new entity, an entity that is the first and only such entity to belong to Guyanese people and to be developed and controlled by them for their own benefit. Thus comes about the birth of the Guyana National Cooperative Bank, the GNCB.
Firstly, when we joined the bank in 1970, we were faced with a tremendous challenge. A challenge which was precipitated by the fact that there was a prevailing school of thought at the time which suggested that of all aspects of human endeavor, the one which was least accessible to the colonial mind was that of money and banking. And it was generally felt that locals just could not have run a bank. We undertook a challenge to give this nation a local bank, and we actually pioneered what we would like to describe as national indigenous commercial banking.
GNCB therefore comes into being as the People's Bank, an alliance of the government, the trade unions, the cooperative and friendly societies for the attainment of economic independence and national dignity. The young Guyana National Co-op Bank is given local shareholders and directors of the bank. This initiates a new dimension into social history of commercial banking in the country.
What we were subjected to in the field of banking up to that time was overseas branch banking. We regarded the Guyana National Co-op Bank as a bank that was set up primarily to operate the business of banking within the framework of the culture and conditions of the local people. In this respect, one found that developmental objectives, separate and distinct from profit-maximizing objectives, was given some more emphasis than that which existed prior to our coming into being. It was generally taught that the overseas commercial branch banking, which was permeating the whole financial system in this country at the time, had incorporated in it a series of weaknesses. The GNCB was the response to remedy those weaknesses. And as I've said, it sought to set about the business of banking within the context of the underdeveloped countries. We feel that some decisions pertaining to policies, etc., that were manifesting themselves in the local conditions were not quite suited to the local scenario. They were more or less precipitated by happenings in the country where the head office of these branch banks had originated from. And it is in that, within the sphere of that scenario, that the GNCB saw itself as being different and set about providing a service that provided financial instruments, a financial institution that came out of the Guyanese conditions, that was suited to the Guyanese conditions. Felt that the foreign commercial banks concentrated primarily in the area of distributive trade. What it was involved in doing was mobilizing the savings or the financial resources in Guyana. And in terms of granting of the loans, it tended to grant loans or credit facilities primarily to distributive trade, which facilitated the role of the overseas investors. So that constituted one of the weaknesses, and as such, the indigenous entrepreneur and the opportunities for him to develop were not easy in that context. He needed finance capital, and some of his requests were not very formal and not very conventional, and one tend to feel that the overseas banking structures, in the general sense, could not have accommodated his needs. Well, I'm not quite sure. It just did not, and as well as could not, in the sense that I don't think they recognize the indigenous entrepreneur as an important agent for development, or development for the local economy. So they were neglected, and that constitutes, as I've said, one of the major weaknesses. Secondly, I don't get the impression that the employment policies were conducive to the development of the local skills in banking. One tend to find that the locals, to a large extent, were not placed in positions in the top echelons of the banking system. As a result of that, you tend to find Guyanese at school who were studying, etc., tend to shy away from the career or the profession of banking because it was not opened.
Directors and management of the new GNCB will then seek to combine commercial development with cooperative banking. One of the novel features would appear in charity in Essequibo and in other remote areas. This was the era of mobile banking. And unlike many banks operating at the time, GNCB pursued the policy of attracting small deposit accounts, especially in rural areas, so that by 1974, deposits would increase by over 10 million Guyana dollars, and in 1980, by over 80 million.
I think that in the early stages, we were not given the kind of respect we ought to have been given, and this again had to do with the new dimension that was now evolving in the financial system in Guyana. A local bank with local people was a novelty, and this, of course, bred some disrespect. You had situations in which the locals were not considered to be adequate, competent bankers, and as such we had some challenges at that point in time. The foreign commercial banks at the time did cooperate with us. As a matter of fact, the Royal Bank of Canada provided us in the early days with some operational training. Nevertheless, one sensed that we were not given the kind of equal playing field that was expected in terms of those relationships. There were some constraining factors. To make matters more exciting, the customers who came to us with a sense of ownership rights. They saw the bank as their bank, and very often when they came to us with an attitude as though they were coming home, and they tended to behave towards us just as how they behaved at home. When they went to our competitors, they tend to go there as visitors, and they tend to conduct themselves in a manner that seems to suggest that they are visitors. Those were some of the constraints. But on the other hand, there were facilitating factors. The bank operated within the context of an environment which had externalities, and the externalities had variables in them that facilitated as well as constrained. The political process, for example, the bank was associated with that. There were certain variables in the political process that facilitated the success of the bank, the development of the bank. We got support in those areas which perhaps may not have occurred had we not come out of that political situation. Of course, there were constraints too within the framework of that political process. And we tend to find that we appeal more to the masses of the people. We went a lot to people. Wherever people are, we went, and we did not show an aversion to sitting down and talking with people irrespective of what area they were in. We held a series of meetings. As a matter of fact, I can remember in the early 1970s, one weekend we held something like 32 whistle-stop meetings from Supernam right on to charity, telling the people what banking is all about, trying to educate them about what banking is all about. We went to the grassroots and talked to people about banking. So as to forge the idea of a national bank and a bank that perhaps was involved in community servicing.
You can hardly meet all the staff in the 70s. We knew everybody, and everybody, used to live like a family. You could hardly tell who is the managing director and who is the office assistant, but things changed now. Well, as far as I'm concerned, the bank is a part of me. I saw it from the inception, and I intend to stay until, well, I probably get too old to be a worker.
The memories go back so far. Working as a maid, it was enjoyable because, I tried to meet the staff with everything, they happened to ask for. At that time, it was really a family, a sort of family relationship. Both the manager, from the manager right down. It was real nice then.
Moreover, GNCB would offer such new services as the payment of wages and salaries of a number of agencies throughout Guyana, virtually becoming the paymaster of the nation. At the same time, the GNCB begins to make its permanent presence felt in other parts of Guyana. In 1971, Linden, New Amsterdam, Rose Hall, Corriverton, and Anna Regina. In 1974, Kokwani and Timari branches are added, and in 1975 comes the GPO branch. By 1977, the Melanie Damishana branch in the east coast of Demerara appears, and in 1978, GNCB appears in Vredenhoek.
I joined that main branch. At that time it was head office, before it was divided into main and head office. And then from there I went on to Esquivel, just for a month, then back to main branch, into our High Street location where we had our international branch, then to our GPO branch, from GPO back to Esquivel, then as the branch manager. From Regina back to GPO, at that time as the operations manager, then to our main branch as operations manager once again, and in April of last year, appointed as branch manager, Vredenhoek. Both Regina and the Vredenhoek branches, they are both agricultural branches, okay? In the Georgetown area, you would find a varied type of industry. And in the for rural banking, it's pretty interesting. You find that the customers are simpler, they are more accommodated, and it's, I would say, pleasant.
More pleasant.
Working in the rural branches. The atmosphere is very conducive, very healthy, and success is assured with that type of atmosphere.
With the solid experience of a pioneering nature in head office banking, a solid network of 12 branches throughout Guyana, and international correspondence relationships in major financial centers of the world, GNCB would evolve into a financial institution with the potential to make an even greater contribution in the last decade of the century.
First of all, the bank must look at the service that it provides, the quality of service. I think new emphasis needs to be placed on quality of service. I think that the bank also needs to look at technology. Banking technology throughout the world has changed quite dramatically in recent years, and we need to modernize the Guyana banking sector. I think the Guyana National Cooperative Bank must play a role in that regard. As far as the ownership of the bank is concerned, I think it's a major policy decision that the government, who happens to be the principal shareholder, has to make. I'm a firm believer in broad-based shareholding, and I believe that the shareholding of the bank should be opened up to the general public in Guyana. But that is a decision that the government will have to make.
In 1989, the owners of the bank decided that it was time to shift strategies from cooperative socialism to economic pragmatism. Thus came about changes that would seek to remedy the weaknesses and to preserve the strengths that existed in GNCB.
Well, I think that GNCB is a very important financial institution in the context of Guyana today. The bank started within a particular context that prevailed at the time when it started. And I think that while circumstances have changed, I do not think that the bank has become irrelevant. I think the bank is very relevant to the needs of the Guyanese banking community. And I think that what we need to do at this point in time is to design financial products that will meet the need of our business sector, of our exporters, of our small entrepreneurs, so as to make the services of the bank relevant to the prevailing circumstances in Guyanese economic development.
And then we came to the year 1990, when the realities were dawning upon the bank, and maybe the pressures and the efforts of the international monetary financial institutions which sought accountability and monitoring and controlling brought to the fore the need for us to have ourselves properly examined and to perhaps cut off the fat. Maybe we can say that at 23 years we have had the excitement of youth and childhood. We have had the full blast of the roaring impetuosity of teenage life. and I think we are now coming into the area of maturity. That can be looked at in this historical context, and we sought the efforts to restructure in 1990, not for restructuring's sake, not for change's sake, but basically to look and see where we went wrong, make efforts to correct them, see areas in which we had our strengths, and to preserve them. And that is how we are operating. So those officers who have been here for a number of years could have said they have passed through a life, the life cycle of the bank, was fascinating and very interesting. And I think, you know, we are coming out of the woods, and we are making tremendous efforts to do so.
There were mistakes made in the past, but I think that we are learning from those mistakes. And while we were the first indigenous bank in Guyana, I think there are other banks which came out of being part of a multinational bank who are new as far as learning to manage their own affairs without, as I call it, the guiding hand of a head office. The GNCB has learned from its experience, and I think that that will put them in a good position to avoid these pitfalls in the future.
I've had specific problems in terms of marketing the bank's products. Because of that negative perception, you introduce a new product to persons and they're kind of like skeptical about getting involved in it. People tend to hold on to the traditional banking services of letters of credit, certificates of deposit, savings accounts, checking accounts, and so on. We've been trying to introduce some new services over the past 2 years, which have not yet been catching on. But this also has to do with the Guyanese own exposure in terms of the variety of banking services and a little resistance to change here and there. For the future, this bank has a whole lot of services planned for the people of Guyana, so that by the time they would even catch on to these new trends, they will certainly come to the Guyana National Cooperative Bank for these services. And we have done a lot of work in terms of looking at a credit card facility, for example. Our check guarantee card, which is a hybrid credit card and a bank card, is one of the many services that can really hit the market.
Another newly created division is the Marketing, Planning and Research Division, which is the academic wing of the bank, which tenders support services in the function of financial engineering designed to put new financial instruments in the market. Some of these include the GNCB Check Guarantee Card and the GNCB Gold Club Card. A major feature of the restructuring exercise would be the creation of the Project Finance and Cooperative Division to deal with project financing credit, a division which would now provide the bank with technical infrastructure to cope with developmental credit. In this resides GNCB's support for small businesses as important agents for development. The bank recognizes that small businessmen collectively account for over 50% of national economic activity and constitute the pivot for big business.
Well, I think the role that the bank has to play based on its historical origins was not properly understood. In this respect, I look upon the Guyana National Core Bank as a unique bank. Unique in the sense that this was the bank that was practicing commercial banking, developmental banking, and cooperative banking all in one. That is what made it a composite bank. And as such, it was catering for a variety of objectives. A lot of it happened to be within this framework of development as opposed to profit maximization. Now, if you examine the contribution that the bank has made towards people's development, towards education, for example, towards the filling of towards the provision of services, banking services. For example, there was a time when all the banks closed down their operations and the GNCB was carrying the operations, for example, in Essequibo. We have been running operations as the only bank in Essequibo for 20-something years. Now, it was not an easy job. In Berbice, for nearly, 10 years, we've been running branches up there, providing the only form of banking services. Now, this was done at a price. We found ourselves in places like Kokwani, Melanie, and all these areas, providing a service to foster, as best as we could, rural development. We must be examined, I think, in that context, and more exciting of all, as I've said earlier on, using the concept of financial intermediation, which we were involved in the sense that we mobilized the savings and we grant it through the credit system for investment purposes. We had at one stage, say for example, our last report, 1990, 74% of the total lending in the commercial banking system in Guyana was done by the Guyana National Cooperative Bank, thereby fostering the savings investment process. Now, our competitors, to a large extent, had a lot of their funds invested in local short-term securities through the central bank, for example, and as such, their role was different. It was profit maximization. And one understands, if you study your economics and, you know, developmental economics, that when your objective is profit maximization, any development that occurs from that tends to be the spin-off. It is accidental, it just happens, right? On the other hand, when your objective was growth and development, and you have specific indices to determine this at your planning stage, then your role tends to be different. And you know, we have done some community banking. We try to assist the cooperatives, for example. We developed our staff a lot in terms of the education process, and we were an integral part of the whole system in the country. Of course, along the line, we had problems. It was a novelty. There was excesses. The ideas, the spirit and the intent was there. But as we moved along, the conditions in the environment did create situations that manifested itself in weaknesses and resulted in some areas that, you know, I think the bank could have well done without. But we are happy to note that in the 1990s now, with the focus on the developmental role of commercial banks, I think people are getting a chance to understand us a little better and understand the role we have played and we are playing, notwithstanding the weaknesses that manifested itself.
All these efforts now reflect in the audit accounts of the bank. In 1991, net profit before taxation was $144.44 million.
The bank has the potential to play a very significant role in terms of development of my country. I feel we have a very solid branch network that has had the experience and had the full blast of the experience. And I think in this respect, we can build upon that, learning from the mistakes of the past. We also have a reasonable correspondent relationship, and we have had, and I repeat this, 22 years of head office experiences in which we formulate policy, we made policy, perhaps in some cases wrong policies, but we are experienced in formulation of policies. And I think it is in that respect that the potential for the significant role that this bank can play exists. And we hope to, in combination with the board of directors and with critical support from people, we're hoping that we'll be able to establish the fact that, you know, we are capable of making this contribution. We expect competition in banking, and I see no problems with that. I think there's a lot of space in Guyana for banking. As a matter of fact, we related to hear that some of the competitors who for a number of years have been in this country are now talking about indulging in some of the activities which the GNCB have been indulging in. I read with interest the other day the idea of granting community loans without security, small man loans. This is what we have been doing for a number of years. As a matter of fact, we can perhaps share experiences with them within the context of Guyana as regards to the challenges that are involved in that. And, you know, that's exactly how I see our role. I think we can make a contribution, and all we need is some understanding, some appreciation.
I just want to assure the banking public that the GNCB, as just provided them with service over the years, will be looking at upgrading that service in the near future, and we look forward to the support of the Guyanese public to make the bank the largest service-oriented bank in Guyana.
And so it would seem on this, the 23rd anniversary of the Guyana National Cooperative Bank, that the best is yet to come.